Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are looking at this really fascinating piece of EBSCO research by Dr. Tricia Smith, and it proves a reality that is honestly a little bit terrifying.
It really is.
Yeah, basically, if you read a book today, and I read that exact same book, we aren't actually reading the same text.
Right, because our brains are, actively editing and altering the information.
Exactly, based on this, completely hidden internal system. So the mission for today's deep dive is for you, the listener, to uncover how this hidden system actually works. We're going to figure out why your brain throws certain facts straight into the mental trash bin, and most importantly, how you can hack this process to learn almost anything faster.
Which is the ultimate shortcut, really, because understanding this mental filing system is how you become well-informed without feeling totally overwhelmed by information.
Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we even start?
Well, to really understand how we learn, we have to shatter some old assumptions first.
Yes.
Specifically, the myth of the tabula rasa.
The blank slate.
Right. For centuries, the prevailing cognitive theory was that a child's mind was just, a perfectly clean surface, unaffected by experience.
Like an empty bucket.
Exactly. The assumption was you just write the info onto the slate or pour the facts into the bucket and it's permanently recorded.
It's a very industrial age way of looking at it. Like, we're just manufacturing knowledge. If you pour enough data in there, eventually the bucket fills up. But scientists clung to that blank slate idea for a really long time, didn't they?
Oh, they did. Largely because it made human development seem predictable. If everyone starts as a blank slate, education is just mass production. Deliver the same inputs, get the same outputs.
Right. Which sounds great in theory, but
But the cracks started showing up pretty early. In 1926, the psychologist Jean Piaget coined the term schema to describe these mental structures.
okay.
And then in 1932, a British psychologist named Sir Frederick Bartlett completely shattered the blank slate model. He was doing work on reconstructive memory.
Reconstructive memory, meaning like our memories aren't just video files on a hard drive that we click and play back perfectly.
Far from it. Bartlett actually had these British participants read a Native American folk tale. It was called The War of the Ghosts.
Okay.
And when he asked them to recall the story later, they didn't just forget details, they actively altered the story.
Wait, really? They changed it?
Yeah. They changed the magical and cultural elements that they didn't understand into concepts that fit traditional British cultural norms.
Uh-oh.
So Bartlett realized memory is not a fixed recording, it's dynamic. We constantly reconstruct our memories through the lens of our own past experiences.
So the bucket isn't just leaking, it's like actively changing the color of the water we pour into it.
That's a fantastic way to picture it.
Mm.
And this whole realization leaped from psychology into modern tech in a really interesting way during the 1970s.
Oh, right. Marvin Minsky.
Yes. Minsky was a computer scientist trying to give AI human-like abilities to, perceive and understand the world.
So every time you get frustrated today because an AI doesn't understand the obvious context of a prompt, you're experiencing exactly what Minsky was dealing with 50 years ago.
The exact same problem. Minsky realized computers couldn't just receive raw data. They needed stored world knowledge to make sense of anything.
Right.
And he concluded humans operate the exact same way. We don't passively receive reality. We actively use our stored knowledge to process new things.
Which means cognitive psychologists had to seriously upgrade their metaphors. The empty bucket is out.
Totally out.
Instead, young minds are more like empty shelves, waiting to be filled or modified. But I have a question about that.
Yeah.
Is building a schema, like setting up a computer directory, like if you download a new file but haven't created a folder for it yet, does it just get lost in the void?
That is exactly what happens. Those schemata, those mental slots, they are the invisible architecture of your mind. If you encounter a new concept but don't have a mental folder for it, your brain literally does not know where to put it.
Which explains so much. I mean, it explains why you can sit through a highly technical meeting and retain absolutely nothing, but some random piece of trivia will stick in your brain instantly for 20 years.
Exactly. And the mechanics of this were detailed in 1981 by researchers Brewer and Trans. They basically laid down the rules for how these mental slots process reality.
Okay, what's rule number one?
Rule number one, if new information falls neatly within your existing schema, it is easily remembered. It just slides right into the pre-existing folder.
Which feels great. It's that, aha moment of validation where everything just clicks.
Right. But rule number two is where we run into cognitive trouble. If the new info is perceived, but it does not fit into an existing schema, your brain's default setting is to either ignore it completely or forget it almost instantly.
It just tosses it out.
It tosses it out.
Yeah.
Processing alien information is energetically expensive for the brain, and the brain loves efficiency. So if a piece of data contradicts your deeply held mental folders, the path of least resistance is just, deletion.
Okay, I have to push back on this a little bit because that feels incredibly bleak.
How so?
Well, if our brain's default reaction to something that doesn't fit our worldview is to just ignore or forget it, doesn't that mean we are biologically wired to be closed-minded? Like, how do we fight that?
You've hit on one of the greatest cognitive challenges of being human. Yes, we are wired for cognitive efficiency, which definitely manifests as close-mindedness.
Wow.
And this brings us to Brewer and Tran's third rule. To fight it, you have to put yourself in a position where the new info absolutely cannot be ignored.
Okay.
When you are forced to confront data that shatters your existing folders, the schema has to change. It modifies to accommodate the new reality. And according to cognitive science, that painful, forced modification is the actual definition of learning.
So learning isn't just absorbing facts, it's the uncomfortable rearranging of the mental furniture.
Exactly. And the theory evolved again in 1988 into what they called purpose-sensitive schema. So instead of rigid folders, think of knowledge stored in complex chunks, like dynamic, interconnected webs.
And these webs don't just sit there waiting for info, right? Don't they actively predict the future and guide our attention?
They do. They dictate what you even pay attention to in a room, which is why we need to understand the 4 specific flavors of schema that Dr. Smith outlines in her research.
So let's break those down. The first flavor is content, or conceptual schema.
All right. This is your world knowledge.
Yep.
Your facts, your values, your cultural conventions. If you read an article about global economics, you don't just read the numbers, you bring your entire conceptual schema about money, scarcity, and fairness to the text.
You're filtering it through your life experience.
Exactly.
And then on top of that, we have the second flavor, textual schema. This one is fascinating because it's not about what the information is, but how it's structured.
Yes, rhetorical structure.
Right, like story grammar, setting, characters, a climax, a resolution. So textual schema is the reason we instinctively know a fairy tale will have happily ever after.
Exactly. Nobody has to state that rule. Your textual schema just demands it.
And when a movie hits us with a massive plot twist, like the main character was dead the whole time, it's so memorable, specifically because it aggressively hijacked our textual schema. We expected a standard resolution, and the violation forced our mental webs to adapt.
Yeah, that adaptation is why those movie twists stay with you for decades.
Okay, so what's the third flavor?
Intertextual schema.
Ah.
This is the bridge builder. It's your brain's ability to discover links between one text that help you understand another text entirely.
Oh, like if I read a dry history book about the Roman Empire last year, and today I'm reading a sci-fi novel about a galactic rebellion, my intertextual schema connects them.
Yes, you understand the fictional politics better because of the historical foundation you built.
That makes so much sense. And the fourth one?
Linguistic schema. This is the raw code. Sentence structure, spelling, grammar. It's the basic machinery of comprehending language itself.
So all 4 flavors are working simultaneously. And there's this quote in the research from Ruddle and Unruh that I think totally reframes this. They say, meaning that is understood from text is not in the text itself, but in the learner.
Which is such a profound shift. The text is just raw material. You, the learner, are constructing the understanding based entirely on the unique schemata you bring to the table.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because if we know how our engine works, we can actively hack it, right? We don't have to just be passive learners hoping things stick.
We don't. We can definitely hack the system.
So let's give the listeners the hacker's guide to learning. How do we improve our own reading and learning efficiency?
Well, the foundation of this comes from educational psychologist Richard Anderson. He identified 6 active functions of schema when we read.
Okay, what do they do?
First, schema scaffolds ideas. Second, it acts as a filter, determining what is actually important to pay attention to so you can ignore the noise. Third, it makes inferences. It lets you read between the lines. If I say, the spy burned the documents, your schema automatically infers a lighter or a match, even if I didn't say it.
It just fills in the blank.
Seamlessly. Fourth, it searches your memory in an orderly way. Fifth, it generates hypotheses when information is missing. And sixth, it provides the structure to produce summaries.
But the trick is getting those functions to turn on in the first place, isn't it? Because if I just sit down and start reading page 1 of a dense report, my schema might still be asleep.
It hasn't booted up yet, which is why educators use advanced organizers. These are practical tools to force the schema to turn on before you even start reading.
Like KWL charts.
Exactly. KWL stands for Know, Want to Know, and Learn. Before you open a book, you explicitly write down what you already know about the subject, then what you want to know. You can use concept mapping or brainstorming.
You're stating the main ideas prior to reading. It's basically like priming a pump. If you don't prime an old well pump with a little bit of water first, you can crank that handle all day and nothing comes out.
That's exactly it. You're building bridges. Whether you are teaching yourself or someone else, you have to determine prior knowledge first. Unactivated prior knowledge leads to a failure to learn.
Is this why reading the summary on the back of a book or the abstract of a paper is so crucial? You're essentially prefabricating the slots in your brain before the real information arrives.
You're building the scaffolding. Because if you just dive in without doing that, your brain defaults to, I have no open folders for this, delete.
We've all been there, reading 3 pages and realizing you absorbed absolutely nothing.
Right. But we also have to talk about what happens when the system fundamentally glitches.
Okay.
What happens when the material assumes you have a set of mental slots that you simply do not possess?
Yeah, this section of Dr. Smith's research was super eye-opening. She talks about the challenges for English language learners and minority students. And it's not a language proficiency issue, right? It's a cultural schema mismatch.
Exactly. Culturally determined first language schema can completely interfere with new understanding. Imagine a reading test about a family flying to a beach resort for summer vacation.
Okay.
For a student from a majority culture background where leisure travel is common, their conceptual schema instantly fills in all the unwritten context.
But for a student whose cultural or socioeconomic schema doesn't include airplane travel or resorts, the underlying logic is just alien to them. They might fail the test, not because they can't read, but because the foundational world knowledge expected by the text just isn't there.
It's a mismatch of experiences. The lack of comprehension isn't a lack of intelligence. It's a failure of the material to build a bridge to the learner's existing knowledge.
It sounds exactly like trying to run Mac software on a Windows PC without an emulator. Like, the hardware is perfectly fine, the processing power is there, but the formatting is fundamentally incompatible. How do we ensure we're building those emulators for ourselves and others?
That is the core challenge, and it's not just cultural gaps. Sometimes the problem is misconceptions.
Right, incorrect prior knowledge.
Yeah, and it's incredibly hard to change because, like we said, the brain already built the folder and it takes too much energy to tear it down.
So how do you overwrite a misconception?
Standard reading isn't enough. You need specific instructional settings that force the learner into cognitive dissonance. They have to actively reject the former misconception. Which brings us to a model by a researcher named Rumelhart.
The construction integration model.
Yes. Rumelhart argued that schema isn't static. It's dynamically constructed in real time in response to input. And it relies on a blend of explicit knowledge and tacit knowledge.
Let's break that down. Explicit knowledge is the obvious stuff, right? The literal text.
Right.
But tacit knowledge is the background processing, the unspoken social norms, the subtle rules of reality we don't even realize we know.
A good way to think of it is how a joke works. The setup and punchline are the explicit knowledge. But the reason you laugh relies on your brain instantly connecting that text to your tacit knowledge of societal expectations.
If the tacit schema isn't there, you just stare blankly at them.
Yeah.
You understand the words, but you don't get the meaning.
Exactly. And Rumelhart is saying that every time we read or learn, we are doing that exact same rapid-fire blending. We are dynamically constructing our schema in the moment.
Which means, if we want to be better learners, we have to actively manage that construction. We have to be willing to feel that cognitive friction instead of taking the easy route of just deleting new info.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap this up, let's summarize the journey we've been on. We went from viewing the brain as a tabula rasa, a blank slate, to understanding it as this incredibly dynamic, purpose-sensitive web of slots.
A massive shift in perspective.
Yeah. And for you, the listener, the takeaway here is practical. The next time you're prepping for a meeting or diving into a new topic, don't just start absorbing facts. Stop. Ask yourself what you already know. Brainstorm. Build your mental scaffolding first before you turn on the fire hose.
Which is great advice. But this raises an important question.
Oh, let's hear it.
If all of our reading comprehension and new learning is entirely dependent on the specific individualized schemata we've previously built.
Yeah.
Are any two people ever actually reading the exact same book, or are we always just reading a reflection of our own past experiences?
Wow. That is wild to think about. If meaning isn't in the text but in the learner, then every book is just a mirror reflecting your own schema back at you.
Yeah.
I love that. The bucket was never empty to begin with. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep building those mental bridges.